All right. I think we're starting this thing. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for joining me today for this virtual launch of my latest book, Urchin, which has just come out with Running the Goat Books and Broadsides. I'm so proud to be working with that press. And I know there are people joining us from all over the world, which just makes me so moved, and I just want to thank absolutely everyone for showing up. I wish I could see your faces. Here I am. I'm actually at the theater on King, which is in a place called Peterborough, or Nogajiwanong. And this is Treaty 20 territory. It's the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations. They're collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. And those peoples have been here for a long time. We live near a beautiful river that, as a settler, I've grown up calling the Otonabee since I moved here. And I've also heard it called the Odonabe, which means the river that beats like a heart. And I've also been told that Nogajiwanong means the place at the end of the rapids, or gathering place at the end of the rapids. And truly, for many of us, it has been a refuge in our lives. And I'm really grateful to all the First Peoples here who've welcomed me, been artistic collaborators, kicked me in the butt when I needed it, whether I deserved it or not. So, and I did. So thank you. And may we heed the teachings of how to care for these waters and lands, because, oh, do they need to be cared for. And that's something we all need to do together. And I also want to thank Ryan Kerr, who's the artistic director of the Theater on King, who's here in the room with me, and Aaron Lidster, who's running the tech, because I would find it very difficult to do this on my own. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
I also need to thank, of course, the Canada Council Public Readings Program, which helped fund this virtual launch, and Marnie Parsons and all the crew at Running the Goat Books and Broadsides. So if you're watching this virtually and you don't yet have this beautifully designed book, I won't speak for the writing, order it from Running the Goat, please. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read 3 short excerpts. I'll probably read for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take questions if there are any, and if there aren't any, I'll make some up. So yeah, this book, it's classified as young adult. I tend to feel like a lot of young adult writers I've talked to, some are very intentionally writing for young audiences. I know I do think about that, but I also think this is the kind of book that certain kinds of people like, and some of them are younger readers and some of them are older readers. So you can decide if you're in either of those categories. This first excerpt is near, as you may be able to see, near the beginning of the book. Dor, who's our main character, Dor's miserable in school and has run into a friend, Mary, who's an adult, and Mary has taken Dor under her wing. She's a wonderful person and a self-taught opera singer. And Mary's fiance, Murph, writes for the Evening Telegram, and he's called them for a little meeting at a soda shop. "I call this meeting to order," Murph announced. "Hear, hear," I shouted. There followed an impressive silence. Murph made his mustache quiver, which caused me to snort birch beer up my nose. Mary laughed. "For heaven's sake, Murph, what meeting?" "The Sardinian has been spotted. She'll be in port by the end of the week. By Friday, Marconi will be in St. John's." A thread of cold went running down my spine. That dream I had last night, it peeked through Murph's words. The ship, the man with the light-filled beings glistering and yammering at him. "Well, we all know that," Mary pointed out. "Who's Marconi?" I asked. "Ignorant child, listen and learn." Murph leaned in, mustache quivering again. "Here's the thing." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Murph," Mary hooted. "How can we take you seriously with that thing?" "Down, Rover!" He made a show of taming the beast. I remembered then. It had been in all the papers. Marconi was an experimenter with a new wireless communication system called telegraphy. My heart beat faster. "What's the thing?" I asked. "A mustache?" "No, silly. What's the thing you said was the thing you were going to say about Marconi?" Murph leaned back and took another swig from his flask. "He claims to be visiting our fair isle to establish ship-to-shore communications. But I don't believe it." He leaned forward, enjoying the theater of the moment, but his eyes had a serious look I didn't often see there. It's got to be something bigger, much bigger. And he's not telling anybody what it is. Mary asked, "Are you saying Marconi's here under false pretenses?" Murph nodded. "I think this whole thing is a bam." I stared. "But that would mean he's lying to the entire Newfoundland government." Mary agreed. "It beggars the imagination, Murph." "Well, think about it," Murph said. "He had that station in Cape Cod. It blew down. His station back in Cornwall blew down too. His investors must be lunging at him. If he doesn't do something big, and soon, all the work he's put in over the past years will be for naught," Mary finished. "But to lie to the Dominion's entire administration." "Is it lying, though? It's not like he won't put in ship-to-shore stations." "I think he's trying to build on his past experiments. He's been going for longer and longer transmission distances. He's gotten up to something over 20 miles. "Well, Newfoundland is considerably further from Cornwall than 20 miles, I pointed out. "Yes, clever young article. But nothing across the seas closer to Cornwall than Newfoundland." "He's got rivals at his heels," Mary mused. "That Tesla fella in New York was quoted as saying he's got something big in the works, a 100-foot spark, whatever that means, at his testing facility in Long Island." "Exactly," Murph nodded. "Marconi's got to do something spectacular. And if that thing doesn't involve his station in Cornwall, I'll shave my mustache." "Oh, goody," Mary responded. "A public demonstration. But you'd want to make sure that it worked," I jabbered. "Maybe you're right. Just imagine if Marconi announced to everybody that he was going to get a signal between Britain and here and it failed. He'd be a laughingstock," Murph nodded, "hence his motivation for secrecy." "Now, what does your editor think, Murph?" Mary asked. "Bah, humbug," Murph admitted. "He's got me writing up a story about that poor fellow who plunged for the courthouse scaffolding and knocked his nopper in." I whistled. "Don't whistle, Dor. You're not a sailor," Mary admonished. "But Marconi," Murph continued, "he's got 2 Roberts in the palm of his hand, and the governor has offered up whatever resources he needs. And here's the thing Dor wants to know about." He leaned in, mustache quivering again. "His station in Cornwall, on a point called the Lizard. Now, he built that up rather quietly. But I have it from a source in London that the place has an electrical transmitting apparatus of 30 horsepower. 30! There's something big on the go." Mary sipped her birch beer, speculative look on her face. "So, what are you thinking? Because if I know you, Murph, you've got some kind of harebrained scheme." Murph clutched at his heart. "My lady!" "Out with it, Murph!" "Well, Marconi is bound to call a conference. My editors asked me to be at the Cochrane Hotel when he arrives." "Oh, can I come?" He took another swig from his flask. "Ah, the golden nectar from the family of Marconi's mother." "What's that?" I asked. "Jameson whiskey," Murph belched. "Murph! Please, excuse me. Naturally, I want you to come, my darling Mary. You can charm people into talking to me, else they will avoid me like the plague." He stared at the draped windows as if he could see through the sheets and over to the Southside hills and beyond. "I need a spy," he muttered. "A spy? Whatever for?" Mary asked. "Someone Marconi won't suspect, someone who can spend time with him during his experiments and report to me." What was this energy surging through my body? Somebody nobody suspected would make the best kind of spy. "Murph!" Mary exclaimed. "Are you giving me an assignation?" Murph looked revolted. "Never! No, Mary! As if I'd do such a thing! Oh, I was thinking more along the lines of asking the telegrammed errand boy, but he's hopeless. A child, a boy. Yes, I could see why Murph had the idea." "Hopeless how?" Murph sighed. "He is, to be frank, a complete idiot. I've taken to delivering my own dispatches. He can't even get an address straight." "Idiots don't make good spies. A boy would be best. I wasn't one, but I wasn't an idiot either. I was... What was I? I had never felt like a girl. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I wanted to do this thing, to meet Marconi and be a spy for Murph. My heart began to race. "What about me?" My voice came out like a death rattle. "What about you, Dor?" I cleared my throat. "I can be your spy." As I said it out loud, the idea seemed bright and hard and true as metal. You'd pretend to be the telegram errand girl?" "There's no such thing as an errand girl," I said. "No, I'd be a boy." "What?" They were both staring at me as if I was a bedlammer. I'd pretend to be a boy. No, I don't, Mary began, but Murph was looking strangely at me. You know, your voice is rather low for girls. I seized on this. The choir teacher at school says I sing like a crow. Go home out of it, Murph, Mary rapped. You're drunk. I assure you, my angel, I'm as sober well, given the state of our colony's justice system, I will not say. No, Dor, you'll never be able to keep up such an elaborate charade. See reason, my darling. And he'll be experimenting with electricity and, well, who knows? It could be dangerous. No, Mary, please listen. I suddenly wanted this more than anything. I haven't got a thing here, I puffed out my chest. I'm skinny as a skinned rabbit. Girls in school all say so. So does Mother. I'm a late bloomer. That's what they all say. Words tumbled out. I hardly knew what they were. I could do it. I could. And I know how to swear. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I've got more chaw than a sheep's head. I can do it. Mary threw Murph a troubled look. Now look what we've done. Besides, she'd missed school. The image of myself as a telegram errand boy was so entirely vivid that it took me a minute to know who Mary was referring to. Murph considered. What about your parents? Could you get out of the house without them worrying? No problem, I said. No, it wouldn't be, Mary said. I worry about you in that house door, rattling around there, nobody paying attention. But the pair of you see reason. You'll never pass for a boy, Dor. Why not? I said belligerently. Well, you're too small for one thing, and you have the most beautiful big eyes, and well, really, it beggars belief that you could suddenly become a boy and fool the world. And if Marconi discovered you, who knows what he would do? Call the police, quite likely. She turned her severe expression on her fiancé. Anything to get a story. Is that it, Murph? Murph looked ashamed. You're right, of course, Mary. You always are. I'm sorry, Dor. I let myself get carried away. But what about your story? To my horror, my eyes filled with tears and my lips trembled. I'll find another way. It's grand of you to offer, Dor, but Mary's right. I can't accept. I cast a beseeching gaze at Mary, clasping my hands. I tried to come up with some stunning logic, some persuasive reason for this plan to work, but all that came out was a whisper. I can do it. Outside, the short December day was drawing to its close. Electric light poles, their web of wires carving the sky, started all at once to light up. No matter what Mary said, the hard brightness of the idea shone in the air before me. I could become this boy. I could. If I had anything to do with it, my life was going to change. So, next little bit. So Dor does manage to get a hold of some cast-off clothes that belong to Claire, who's the love interest. I'm half in love with her myself. And her older brother, Clinton, has cast off his Sunday best, and these fit Dor perfectly. So Dor gets into this suit of boys' clothes. This novel, by the way, I didn't say any of the things I should have said about it before I started reading. It's set in 1901 in St. John's, Newfoundland, which is a very exciting time in St. John's, 1901. And Marconi, that part is all true. He did come to St. John's and sent the first transatlantic wireless signal from there in December 1901, coming up on an anniversary. So anyway, Dor manages to fool even Murph and Mary, who know Dor very well, in this suit of Clinton's clothes. So then they agree to take Dor along with them to the Cochrane Hotel, where Marconi is meeting all the dignitaries in St. John's and giving a big press conference. My excitement grew with every step toward the Cochrane Street Hotel. I would meet Marconi, a famous man who was going to change the world with his invention. I tried to call up everything I knew about Hertzian waves and contemplate the vast global implications of wireless telegraphy. But just as much, I had to admit, I was excited to meet an Italian. I'd never seen one before. Maybe he'd be dark. Almost certainly he would be. Dark hair and eyes at the very least, like me. The steps of the hotel were blocked, for word of the famous guest had run through the town. Murph pushed through, greeting many of the onlookers by name, and Mary did the same. Did they know everybody? It was always like this with them. You couldn't get anywhere for talking. Despite the crowd, plush carpet and wood paneling soaked up sound like a sponge. Everything felt hushed, poised on a knife edge. I'd never been inside a hotel before. I gawped at the vast brass chandelier hanging from the hallway ceiling and admired the elaborate paneling. Murph led us down the hall to a big room with double doors flung wide. We were just in time. The Minister of Marine and Fisheries was beginning a speech. I craned my neck trying to see, but it was impossible in the crowd. Something else was said, imperceptible, but it initiated a ripple of good-natured laughter. Just made a hash of his name, Murph muttered, getting out his pencil and pad. Oh dear, Mary sighed. Murph began a process of using his elbows and muttering, "Press, press," to edge through the crowd, getting us closer to the front. The minister went on enthusiastically outlining the benefits of Marconi's new system to shipping. Mary edged ahead, slipping between a gap that closed in my face, a wall of tweedy jackets. The minister wound down, and there was a brief stir. Next spoke Premier Bond, who had apartments in the very hotel. He noted that although it behooved no Newfoundlander to take pleasure in the filthy weather of another country, there was no doubt that Newfoundland had benefited greatly from a certain violent storm in Cape Cod, which raised a general laugh. We pledged our resources and energies to support him. The room was hot. The speeches seemed to go on forever. I wish I could take off my woolen cap. But finally, there was a bout of sustained applause. And a man began to speak. It wasn't loud, but everyone piped down. The voice had an easy, pleasant quality, yet somehow conveyed authority. You wanted to listen to it. It was him. It must be him. But the voice was disappointingly English. It was no different in accent than that of countless British officials, or my teachers at Spencer. I strained on tiptoe, but an awful length of a man towered in front of me, and I was packed in too tight to get past him. The voice thanked Premier Bond and the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries for inviting him to this wonderful island dominion. It spoke of investigating the possibility of setting up wireless stations to reduce the number of shipwrecks, something he had only moments ago been discussing with the inspector of lighthouses. My mission, the voice continued, still sounding entirely unforeign, is to eventually establish stations along the south coast of Newfoundland, thus enabling incoming vessels to more quickly communicate with the mainland. Upon the morrow, I will investigate nearby sites and select one most suited to my experiments. And he went on to thank various people, most especially Premier Bond and Government Boyle, for making his arrival so pleasant after what he admitted had been a horrendous crossing. "Welcome to Newfoundland," someone called out, evoking laughter and a general rumbling cheer. The volume of chatter rose, bodies started milling about. I could now slip between groups of conversationalists, gradually sidling to the perimeter of the room. Nobody paid any attention to the boy in the flat cap. Nobody. If I'd been in my girl's clothes, I would have been remarked and ejected from the room at once. I look like a boy, I really do, I exulted. If anybody asked, I'd be Jack Kelly, telegram errand boy. That beautiful lady is my sister, just ask her. From the sidelines, I caught sight of that beautiful lady at last. Sir Cavendish Boyle was bending over her hand and kissing her fingers. The two of them laughed, and then I scuttled along the wall to see. He led her over to another man and made what I judged were introductions. The other man was... I couldn't see through the cursed crowd, and in any case, Mary's colossal hat quite blocked the view. Was it Marconi? It must be. Drawing a bead on said hat, I plunged into the crowd once more. I made it through. There was Mary, and there, gazing at Mary, was the man called Marconi. I knew him, or at least I knew that energy, that tightly drawn cold vitality, for it was the figure I'd seen in my dream. I looked up at a slender man, maybe a shade under 6 feet. He wasn't as handsome as Murph, but he was elegant and well-proportioned. His eyes, delivering me a crushing blow of disappointment, were gray-blue, and his hair was a dissatisfying light brown, and his skin was almost as fair as Mary's. The most remarkable thing about him was that he looked completely unremarkable. "There you are," Mary exclaimed. "Signor, please meet my brother, Jack. Shake Mr. Marconi's hand." Nobody had ever suggested I shake hands with anybody. Never in my life. Nervously, I screwed my cap even more firmly down over my head and held out my hand. Marconi gazed down at me, barely taking me in. But his grip was strong, and I made an effort to squeeze back, thinking that's what a boy would do. "Pleased to meet you, sir," I managed. "I was just telling Mr. Marconi that you'd be an able errand boy for his work." "Oh, I'd love to," I exclaimed. Wait, was that too girly? It'd be an honor, sir." Marconi's eyes moved restlessly about the room. How many of these junkets had he attended? Surely hundreds, maybe thousands. Wherever he went, people would be eager to meet him. They'd offer to help, want to be involved in the glory. It must be irritating. "I wouldn't let you down, sir," I hackered. "I know every business in town, and I take direction. I'm bright and I'm strong, and Mary can vouch for me." Marconi's gaze wandered back to Mary, and his vague look focused. Well, if Madame Mary can vouch for you, then we will take you on. He bowed slightly, never taking his eyes from her face. Wonderful, Senor, Mary said. You hear that, Jack? You start tomorrow, Senor. You certainly aren't wasting any time. I do hope you have time for pleasure as well as work. Always. It does not do to waste time in work or pleasure. There was something hard and brilliant about him when, like now, his diamond-sharp gaze focused on my friend. I revised my previous opinion. He wasn't disappointing. He was fascinating. Unassuming, unsmiling, but coolly confident. He made me feel sweaty and messy and needy and loud. A precision in his consonants, and also the scent of him, slightly spicy, soap and pomade, coffee and smoke, proclaimed him a citizen of the globe. The crystal glass of the chandelier above him tinkled, as if echoing his words. I noticed he had a red silk pocket square poking out of the top of his breast pocket. King of diamonds, indeed. He belonged to every place, or perhaps no place at all. So then things happen. Lots of things happen. You'll have to buy the book to find out what. So there's trouble at Dor's home. I'm focusing a little more in this reading on those two passages anyway, more to do with the public life and Marconi. But there's a lot about Dor's own life, mother and father at home on the Southside Road. Dor's mother is a midwife for the whole Southside Road and out all the way to Fort Amherst. And so it's nothing unusual for her to be called out in the night, but she gets called out and she doesn't come back. And there's something eerie about the way she gets called out, and it's really sticking with Dor. Dor has a bad feeling about it. There's also a character that we've met previously in the book who Dor's mother knows, everyone calls this person the Reverend. And the Reverend is a tiny person. And he often wears a mix of beautiful gowns, but with, say, a top hat and tails. And he attends all the funerals of anyone of significance in St. John's. It's not a funeral unless the Reverend is there. And the night before Dor's mother's disappearance, the mother had told Dor that the Reverend lives down the road at the old man's beard. So this is after the disappearance. Time felt to me now like a great ocean. Our old house, that creaky, swaying ship of Theseus, sailed upon it, sure as the frigate sailed over the face of the grandfather clock. But could there be different currents running through time? If one thing could be changed, if I hadn't let that girl burst the buttons from my dress, say, or if my father hadn't been logy with drink, would a new current come into being, a new wave, carrying time and our house off in another direction? Would my mother still be at home? Was there another tide where mother would walk up the steps right now, having only lost her old red sweater? Previously, my little stream of time had been a thread. One thing happened and then another, all in a line, like the string of pearls around the Reverend's neck. Now the necklace had been broken, and the pearls scattered, lost in the depths. I could not find them. It was Monday, I realized with dull shock. I should be going to school. The sun was coming up behind the hill. Our house and the south side were still cast in the shadow of that great tor, but on the north side, the city was lit seashell pink, gold, blue, glittering silver. Rose-colored gulls flew out to sea. The hill loomed bleeding darkness, an expanding density, like a tidal wave making a landfall. There was a sense of breath held, of the world coming to a stop. And then the sun cracked over the summit, a line of pale, sparkling fire, and everything was limned in brilliance. We'd had a silver thaw. Snow had come down heavy in the night, and then, sometime before dawn, changed to freezing rain. Everything was covered now in ice. I should be on my way to school, not sitting huddled at the top of the Ratlin, looking out across the riverhead at the ice-glistered city. I would not be going. Father was in the house, asleep or awake, I didn't know. He was inconsolable. Mother had fallen off a cliff in the fog and the dark, and the sea had taken her. That was his implacable belief. He blamed himself. But then, who had come and called her out? I had thought about it all through the night. I would not believe Father was right, not yet. Nor did I believe those whispers from the neighbors comparing my mother to that chaplain who destroyed himself. She'd been called out and she'd gone, and now we didn't know where she was, but she wasn't dead. Not yet. The old man's beard was the name for a particular patch of snow on the Southside Hill. It was in a deep ravine. The sun never shone in it. Long after the rest of the world was covered in green leaves and flowers, ice and snow remained in that long, dark, frozen cleft. You'd be crazy to live there. I decided to climb the hill rather than walk down the road. The thought of encountering the inevitable neighbors, having to endure sorry looks and whispers, overtopped me. No, I'd climb the steep slope behind the house and make my way along the hill and come on the old man's beard and, I hoped, the Reverend from above. I remember my father saying, "Don't go off without bread in your pocket." Now that had to do with them. Having bread staved them off. Or maybe it just was to have something in case you got hungry. But my pockets were empty. I couldn't turn back now, though. It was a cruel scramble up the first bit of cliff, especially with the ice. But I knew every foot and handhold, for in summertime my parents and I would tote a billy can for a boil-up, seeking blueberries and partridge berries, crowberries and brambles. I spent many hours up on the hill alone, too, picking berries, making wreaths of daisies and laburnum blossoms and tangles of wild roses, glaring arrogantly over the city as I crowned myself king. A long, smooth, blindingly white slope stretched before me. I went forward on my hands, feet chopping steps, the sound of my boots crunching through ice. How I wished I'd thought to wear Jack's boots. The smell of cold snow, the panting of my own breath, the calls of gulls all served to ground me. I hadn't slept or eaten, but I felt no hunger. The climb seemed endless, but I was not tired. I chanted under my breath. King William was King George's son, and all the royal race he run, and on his breast a starry war, come pointing to the governor's door. Why did that feel so warm, rolling around on my tongue? The words themselves meant something dark and rich, thick, dripping, and gleeful, the way Claire said it. Claire. Was it my imagination? Or were voices singing, whispering, murmuring all around? I looked about. Nothing. It must have been the wind, I thought, although there wasn't a breath. The day was still. I'd come up higher than I thought. The south side was out of sight beneath the hill. It was open country before me, all the way to Freshwater Bay. The ice was thick over the snow here and slippery. I pictured myself losing my footing, falling away. Who knows where I'd land? There would be nothing to stop my slide until I went off a cliff. I bent over again, walking like an animal. Come choose to the east, come choose to the west. Choose the very one that you love best. I was hearing something, a dull murmur. Hello? I straightened up again. Nobody. I began to pick my way laterally across the slope, towards the narrows. Down on this carpet you may kneel, as the grass grows in the field, and kiss your partner as you're sweet. Then you may rise upon your feet. As if it were my sweetheart face, I touched my lips to the ice. It did not push back. The murmuring grew louder. If there had been grass, I would have thought it was wind rushing through. As it was, licking my cold lips, I stood, arms out for balance. I was at a place I'd never seen before. The snow and ice were gone. I stood on green grass, pouring down the slope in smooth emerald tussocks like water on a high river. Strange, tall trees stood around me in a circle. They were unlike any I'd ever seen before, towering above with naked trunks and clusters of odd, flat leaves high over my head, obscuring the sky. They flipped this way and that, the leaves, showing one color and then another, unnatural, unnameable colors. The smooth bark was pale green, with knots all the way up on every trunk. They looked like the faces of old people. And that talking, murmuring all around, I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. It was coming from the trees. The ground seethed beneath my feet. Tussocks shifting like bodies stirred beneath the grass. Was that my name? Had someone said my name? And in that moment I lost my footing. I was sliding down and down, head first on the icy crust. No trees above. The blue sky shook and whirled. I flailed my arms and hands, kicked with my feet, trying to break through the ice. One heel managed to catch, and I wrenched around sideways, momentarily halted. And then my foot slid off the edge, and I was off again. I pounded with my fists, I kicked with my heels, I yelled. And then there was a tree, not one of the strange ones, but something old and bent and leafless coming up fast. I was headed towards it. I would hit it. I screwed my eyes tight shut and flung up my arms. There was a sound like a train and a bright light. And nothing. Now you've done it. I lay in snow. I was so cold. One eye didn't want to open. With the other, I saw a crow. It stood on the ice, not an arm's length away, moving its head about as it gazed at me. It ruffled its feathers and half raised its wings. It had one white feather on each pinion. You've done it indeed. Darkness took me again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, questions. I have a laptop. I'm going to lean in and see if anybody's like typing fascinated questions for me to try to answer.
And we're a couple minutes behind, so you just finished on the live stream. We'll have to wait a second for
Okay.
someone to type something.
We've got some lovely comments here. Yes, Running the Goat says, yeah, do order from them or from your local indie bookstore. And it is very important to support our local sellers. Absolutely. And a comment here from Jill Walker says, Dora's already captured my heart. Yes, me too, Jilly. Yeah. Yeah, she's one of those characters you sort of, even though I've written her, I kind of fell in love with them. Well, I'm trying to think if I should just launch into like the kinds of questions I like to ask other writers. Did you put your hand up, Erin?
Oh, I gave you the thumbs
Oh,
up.
thumbs up.
I think
Okay.
I'd like to know the answers to your questions for myself.
I'm always kind of curious what led a writer to write a particular book, if there is a story behind it. And there is a story behind this one, which is, in essence, it's almost like a commission, which I've never had before, and I just adore doing. And Marnie Parsons of Running the Goat approached me and wondered if I would write a book, and very specifically, young adult, historical, set in Newfoundland with fairies. So I sort of cast around, and the historical part was, the part that I was kind of like, where, when in time would I want to set this? And part of me wanted to go like sort of Regency period, because I have a shameful love of the Regency period. And I may yet write a Newfoundland novel set in that period, because in fact, that's when Dor's great-great-grandfather, who built the house that Dor grew up in, that's when he was around. So there's a bit of a story there. But I settled on Marconi, I think in part because I grew up, Signal Hill. I grew up in St. John's. Seeing Signal Hill was, and going up that hill, and Cabot Tower and all of that. Cabot Tower was new in 1901. Signal Hill, was called Signal Hill before then. Marconi didn't get it named Signal Hill because it's where they used to put the signals for the ships coming in, the shipping. But it was just a big part of my life. And the more I researched Marconi, the more interesting I found him. Like, to be honest, I know maybe this is terrible, but like having grown up there with like the historical moments with Marconi, I was a bit like, oh my God, radio signals, whatever. And then it was like, it made me realize how much radio has changed the world, which is something I've always adored radio. And for good and for bad, World War I was very much influenced by that. And Marconi himself is an interesting figure. And what he did was interesting, and how he did it was interesting. And later in his life, he became a fascist, unfortunately, which was something I also wanted to sort of reckon with and build into the story. But essentially, the rest of it really came out of what Marnie Parsons asked me to do. And I decided to set it on the Southside Road because that's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. And I felt like there's so many stories there. And I'm not the only person telling them, that's for sure. But I'm one person who can tell some of those stories. And also, I grew up there with the Southside Hills, and there's a whole eerie kind of. There's a lot of stories about the Southside Hills. I grew up with a lot of stories, and some strange things have happened up there to different people. There's a bit of magic up there. It's getting built over, now. It was quite wild when I grew up. but I still remember it as a really magical place. So for me, that was a big draw. And then once Dor came into focus for me, the whole story came into focus. Once I realized that Dor is ambivalent about this sort of girl that's been, this girlness that's been assigned to Dor, in a way that I also was ambivalent. However, I was a child in the 1970s, so there was a little more scope. You know, you could kind of wear boys' clothes. In 1901, that wasn't available to someone like Dor. So that really captured my imagination. And then, you know, once I understood the other characters, you know, Murph, Mary, and then Claire, who's Dor's love interest, I got to know Marconi a little more. The Reverend, oh my goodness, just like everything took off once I figured out who the Reverend was. And the Reverend's kind of a mishmash of different historical figures in St. John, so anyone who's studied the history of St. John's will probably recognize elements of the Reverend from actual figures. Yeah, sort of the people around Dor came into focus, and then the whole story just, I found its heart. And the parents too, even though I didn't read anything with the parents in it, they're a huge part of the story, and I'm really fond of them. So yeah, that's a bit about where that came from for me. Anyone who read my very first novel, Blasted, will see some similar themes, certainly around the fairy lore. I relied very heavily on Barbara Rietti's book, Strange Terrain, wonderful book. Get it, if you can. Someone asking if I see Dor's story continuing. Well, that's an interesting question. Yes, actually. Whether I'd write it or not, I might. I do know what happens to Dor. There's a framing device for the book. So anyone who's really doesn't want to read anything about the pandemic, like the first, I don't know, it's like 2 pages. Don't panic. It's set during the 1918 flu epidemic, but it's only 2 pages. I made the decision to do that before coronavirus changed our lives, because I knew that Dor was going to leave Newfoundland. I knew that as a genderqueer person in that period, there was no way Dor was going to stay. And they were going to get out of there. And they ended up going to New York City, because there was this really exciting thing that happened around World War I. A lot of refugees, artists who were refugees, and other kinds of refugees too, but a lot of artists ended up in New York City from all over Europe. And the Caribbean and other places too, but mainly Europe. And these people were so far ahead of their time, we are still catching up. And there were these 2 women, Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson, and they edited something called The Little Review, which published Ulysses for the first time, James Joyce. They published, Ezra Pound was one of their contributing editors. I believe Ernest Hemingway was one of their editors, or contributors. Like, he would sort of find people in Europe and say, oh, you should publish this person. They published this amazing woman, Elsa von Freytag von Loringhoven, I think was her name, the Baroness, who was just an incredible person, who I actually would love to make a piece of theater about someday. And these people, I thought, were kind of the tribe, right? Like Jane Heap, one of the editors of The Little Review, she would always wear a suit. She always wore men's clothes, but with lipstick. And she got thrown in jail a lot because that was considered indecent. And the Baroness used to wander around with like a bicycle light on her bustle and like tin cans for a bra. Like, these people were really, really interesting people. So I figured that Dor would end up there, and she'd end up being a poet. So I know she ends up in New York City and does survive the pandemic. So if anybody's concerned, don't worry. The story's not about a pandemic, just a little framing device. But that's where I can see the story going. Like, maybe we would see Dor's early years in New York, and her discovering her own poetic voice. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting place.
Jill Walker would like to know, is there some of Kate's story in Dor?
Oh, so is there some of Kate's story in Dor? Absolutely, yes, there is. There is. There's probably, like, I am conscious of quite a few things that I stole from my own life, and there's probably stuff I'm not conscious of. So some of the obvious things for me anyway. So that thing I just read where she slides down the silver thaw and she goes head first down the hill, that's from my own life. I was a lot younger than Dor is in the book when that happened to me. I got a terrible concussion. I was only 5 at the time. And I hit an apple tree head first. my father saw it from like the third story window of the house, and he somehow got up, like I think it's a parent thing, like when you see your child in peril, and he said I must have flown, because somehow he got from the third story window to the hill in time to see me hit the tree head first. And I ended up in hospital for a long time. I was unconscious for about a day and a half, which probably explains a number of things about me, but anyway. So that concussion, and then subsequent migraines, and I get these oral migraines where I see auras. And I decided to kind of fold that into Dor's story when Dor has encounters with the little people, with them. It's okay to talk about them on a Thursday. They're not listening on a Thursday. So when she has encounters, or they have encounters with them, it's through this sort of interstitial world that the auras of a migraine, if you get those kinds of migraines, it's other kinds where you don't see these auras. You can kind of only see, like, you can't see straight ahead of you. It's like a black hole. And then there's like sparkles all around here. And there's this tiny little peripheral where you can kind of see what the so-called real world is. So I decided, well, what if I decided you're actually seeing into it's a portal into another world, that maybe that's how Dor can see them. So I personally haven't seen them, as far as I know. They haven't revealed themselves to me. But I thought that might be how Dor saw them. So I stole the concussion and the migraines from my own life. There's an incident with 3 lacy ladies coming through the wall. I did see that, but I was with my mother, and my mother did have a gift of seeing people from beyond. And I was holding her hand. I have a feeling like touching someone who has that gift, maybe then you have it too. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up, but it's a feeling I've always had. So when I was a little girl, I was holding my mom's hand, and we saw those 3 ladies just come through the wall of the house. And they were quite lovely, and then they floated out the other side. So when you get to that point in the book, that I did see that. There's some emotional stuff that I share with Dor. So like the gender identification and stuff, like, or non-identification stuff, I guess. I really didn't feel like a girl growing up. I didn't feel like I wanted to be a boy. I felt like I really, really, really just hated how I got treated as a girl in the society, and I didn't feel like one. And I noticed that I thought, in the selfish way that maybe many humans have, I know everyone struggles, but as a kid, I just thought everybody else effortlessly knew how to be a girl or a boy, and I was the weird one. I was the only one who just had no idea what was going on. Like, I didn't get the memo. The wrong fairies came to my christening, right? Like, I just didn't get it. And so I just felt like, I just thought, if I have to be a girl, I just wish there was more scope for what a girl is. Was my feeling all the way through my life, actually. That kind of never went away. And so I kept trying to expand the definition of womanhood, like, in my way or whatever. Boy, I've really changed the world on that one. Yeah, we aren't seeing a resurgence of gender roles or anything. So anyway, that was really powerful for me to explore through Dor. I thought particularly in the period, because she would, or they, she would call herself a she back then because the pronouns thing, the they hadn't happened. But, when Dor becomes Jack and feels that surge of self-recognition, I really identified with that because it made her feel powerful. It made her feel like herself for the first time in a kind of irony. And I can relate to that, I think that the ability to let your identity come and go and be fluid is something someone like me, and I know there's lots of people like me, it's something that we need. We're not making it up, it's not a frill or an add-on. It's such a key part of identity, and it's something I'm still just learning about in myself, and it's going to continue to change, I think. So that's it for that. I mean, there's some other stuff, like some of the intellectual debates that the Dor's parents have may come from my family. And some of the talk, a lot of the talk, the way people talk, the parties, the mummers coming to the house. These are all my own memories, yeah. So yeah, I ripped off my own life a fair bit.
Frank Flynn would like to know, having explored the world of fairies and having written this book, did your thinking and awareness of the mystical change?
Did my thinking and awareness of the mystical change? When I wrote about them, I'm very superstitious, if you can't tell. In Blasted, the main character in Blasted, Ruby, gets a series of boils up her back because she's been blasted. And I actually got a series of boils up my back while I was writing the book. So, that scared the hell out of me, right? So anyway, I was like, maybe I'm just super neurotic and I can, induce weird illnesses in my own body. But I felt like there's a feeling that you're not supposed to talk about them, you're not supposed to write about them, and, this kind of stuff, right? Or you have to be careful and very polite. So that did frighten me a little bit. And I was aware of that the whole time I was writing this book and drafting it. And I had a bunch of little rituals that I would do. Like I would sort of find something like a herb that I could burn, like smudge, like, trying to do my little cellar smudge. And I had a real struggle writing, and sometimes I was like, maybe it's because, I'm cursed and I shouldn't be writing this story. And, if I'd been actually in Newfoundland writing it, I think I probably would have just like folded up under the bed and hidden, there's a feeling, there's a bit of, maybe I'm just terribly superstitious, but there is something going on there, and certainly I heard a few stories growing up from even my own father, was fairy-led twice. He respected imagination tremendously, but I wouldn't describe him as a fanciful person. But he had these two experiences that he told me about. One of which I read about there is kind of ripped off the story he told me about the strange trees just being somewhere absolutely unfamiliar. And then the next minute you're back and you're like, oh, I know where I am. So I don't know how you explain that kind of thing. But I would say that it didn't change as much this time around as it did when I wrote Blasted. I think Blasted was where I was doing all that research with Strange Terrain, Barbara Reddy's book. I did do more research about midwives and witchcraft in Newfoundland, and there's a wonderful character, Nanny King, who I didn't read about just now, but Nanny King can read the cards, playing cards. She reads it like we would read tarot cards. And again, that was quite common on the Southside Road. I didn't ever see anybody do this, but previous to my lifetime, my generation, there were women on the Southside Road who could read the cards. We're known for that. So I think I channeled a lot of things that I already knew about and felt inside. But I would say, I think I changed less this time around, my feeling about the mystical. I'm just getting more superstitious, Frank, the older I get. That's what's happening. It's terrible.
There's a little conversation going on in the chat about reading about Newfoundland. Things that have been mentioned are Colony of Unrequited Dreams.
Yes.
McFarlane's The Danger Tree.
Yes.
And Michael Crummy, but would you like to add any suggestions for...
Oh, so it's like reading list, like who to read?
What to read about Newfoundland.
Oh, my goodness, read Lisa Moore, for crying out loud. Anything by Lisa Moore. She's wonderful. But yes, Michael Crummy, amazing. I love The Innocents. I just finished. That's the most recent one that I just finished. Yes, of course, Colony of Unrequited Dreams. I admire Wayne Johnson tremendously, and we are Facebook friends. And I will say there were aspects of Colony, I'm not alone in this, aspect of Colony of Unrequited Dreams that made me quite angry. Some of the geographical discrepancies, I wondered, why, Wayne, why? And if he's watching this, he's laughing. I really liked the character Fielding in that book, but I did not like the portrayal of Joey. I felt Joey was kind of a weird depressive in that book, and he was anything but depressed. He was quite manic, if anything. Joey Smallwood is a fascinating character, though, and I highly recommend Colony of Unrequited Dreams. Don't get me wrong. Wonderful book. You should read the Dictionary of Newfoundland English. I'm not just saying that because my father was one of the people who pulled it together, along with John Widdowson and Bill Kerwin. It's a fabulous book. I mean, like if you say, why would I read a dictionary? It is the most engaging dictionary, and it just brings to life the light and shade of earlier Newfoundland settlement and like how the whole imaginative and cultural world, how many different kinds of words for ice and snow. I mean, it tells you something, right? For sealing, food, all the different like 11s, like hobbits have 11s. Well, we've got 11ers, we've got 4vers, we've got 5ers, we've got 6ers, like we've got all kinds of eating times in Newfoundland and all kinds of description for different snacks and different kinds of bags, like a nunny sack, et cetera, that you might put a snack in. It's very important. Snacks are very important, which makes me happy. I like to snack. I'm trying to think. I'm probably forgetting all these other wonderful writers. There's so many good writers that come out of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a province that really hits above its weight in writers. So I'm apologizing for writers that I'm just blanking out right now, not thinking who to say, but there are so many.
Sarah McNeely says, tell us about Murph's mustache. It's a character in and of itself.
Murph's mustache is based on my brother Simon. His mustache. So Simon, anybody who knows Simon's story knows that he has the most magnificent facial hair when he feels like it, and gorgeous, gorgeous red, and big, like it can get big. And Simon has been known to, do the full facial hair and then have just the mustache. And sometimes, in fact, friends have requested for weddings and so on that he grow the mustache just to be in the wedding party. And he will comply because he's a very, very pleasant fellow. So Simon's mustache, sometimes Simon, being a humorous fellow, it has a life of its own, and it is like a character. And I just picture Murph with that mustache. Also, Edwardian times, mustache was very much the look. If you think of that bowler hat and the mustache, that's a sort of kind of like Edward Gorey. Anybody who's a fan of Gorey, he was not an Edwardian, but he really loved that period, and most of his stuff is set in a kind of proto-Edwardian world. So that's kind of what you can picture. Steampunk, if you're into it, yeah, you get that. So yes, Murph's mustache is a character, very much so. Thank you, Sarah.
Jill Walker, when you are writing, is your voice a Newfoundland voice or a mainlander? Say a person from Peterborough. I love when your home voice emerges in readings. Oh yeah, it does, doesn't it, Jill? Yeah. Well, there's this weird thing. So yeah, I mean, a book about Newfoundland. Oh yes, very much so. It's very much the cadences I grew up with. Like I grew up on the Southside Road, and I lived in Newfoundland until I was 16, and then I fled. I couldn't wait to get away, and then I was just homesick forever. Physical pain of homesickness. That surprised me, and it's still there. Recently, I couldn't go home, because of the pandemic. It was over 2 years. I'd never been away for so long, and I dragged Ryan. We went there in October for 6 wonderful days, and I almost fell down on the tarmac and kissed it. I was so happy. So yeah, it's true. I've been in Ontario for a very long time, longer than I ever lived in Newfoundland, but I feel this sadness because all my loved ones here, I don't speak in my real voice, and it's not a conscious thing. It comes out sometimes. I mean, everybody's heard it. If I'm a bit drunk, or if I'm tender sometimes, or if I'm angry, it comes out. And it's a weird thing. I think that there's a kind of code switching maybe that goes on, right, where you change your voice if you can, because anyone with an accent in Southern Ontario is remarked. And it feels uncomfortable, right? So I can sound, my mother was from Ontario, that's not a challenge for me to suppress the accent. I never had a really strong one. But yeah, when I write, it's back. And I was very conscious with this book in particular, and Blasted too, I would say, was another one, of it being that Southside Road, which had more than one accent, actually. The Southside Road, like down the road from me, they had a whole different accent. That wasn't, and they called like the hill the mountain. We never called the hill the mountain. And anyway, a whole other accent. And there's a lot of different accents in Newfoundland. It's not just one. But I do. Yeah, Jill, I do have this sort of Newfoundland cadence or voice in my mind when I'm doing that writing. And if I had infinite time and there was never a deadline, I probably would have combed through this book. I mean, if you haven't read your book 8 million times, honestly, if you haven't read it, oh my God, at least 20, 30 times by the time it hits like this form, you're not doing your job as a writer, right? You have to have read it and read it and read it, and you get almost sick of it. And I would love to have read it. I read a lot of it out loud to myself, but to make sure that it kind of worked, but I could have kept doing that. And I think the voice would have come through even more. I feel like I would still like to be making some changes as I'm reading. I'm like, oh, I'd like to edit that, just to get it more in line with the voices that I'm hearing and the embodied voice that I feel when I read it out loud. Yeah. You're at 5 to 6.
Oh, so I guess we should stop soon. We should wrap it up. Just gonna stare and see if there's any. No, that's good. I just want to thank everyone again who joined us. This is the first time for me. It's the first time here at the Theatre on King that we've done a live stream literary launch. We may do more because, even if and when, hopefully when, this pandemic is more under control, it's a great way to reach people who aren't going to be able to make it here. And that's something that is not lost on me. It's very important. It's an accessibility piece that I think is really, really key to how we can go forward in the world, as humans. And so I just want to thank you all for making this a success. Thank you. It was a great pleasure to read, and like I said, I wish I could just see your faces, but it was a great pleasure to read for everyone, and I really felt you there. And order the book, From Running the Goat, Books and Broadsides. Thanks once again, and thank you to my tech support, Ryan and Aaron. And go forth into your lives, and be well.